Welcome all of you fellow Arcanists out there to the Frith Guild podcast, where we explore an amazing world full of mystical creatures and their partners. Next week, we will continue with the second half of Book 4 of the Frith Chronicles, Plague Arcanist. But today, Eric got an opportunity to sit down with John Stovall, husband to the Frith Chronicles' own Shami Stovall, and author of multiple book series under his own name, particularly within the fantasy lit RPG subgenre. So, without further ado, here are Eric Smith and John Stovall.
Welcome back to the Frith Guild podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and unfortunately, Scott won't be joining us today, but today we do have a special guest on the show. We have none other than John Stovall.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
Great having you here. John is the author of the Dungeon of Stories series, the City of Masks series, Superhero Dungeon series, and most recently, the successful Elf Empire books, and Demon Card Enforcer, which is eating up the popularity boards on Royal Road, as I've heard. In addition to all of that, he's also Shami Stovall's husband.
Yes, which is the main reason I'm an author at this point.
Kind of getting into it today, just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of like how did a pair of lawyers in California turn around and become successful full-time writers in Wichita, right?
It's kind of a longer story. I'm considerably older than Shami, about 8 years older. And so I was more established when we met. And so when I was an attorney, I put her through law school, but partway through law school, she started writing. And I hated being a lawyer. I did it for 13 years. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. It's not because it's like a bad job per se, but it is mind-blowingly stressful. I basically did criminal defense, family law, and parents' defense for when children are taken away by like CPS and stuff like that.
Okay.
So probably twice a week I had a trial where either somebody's freedom, because I also did, and sometimes permanent freedom because I did murder trials and stuff like that as well. You know, home or children, something like that was going to go away forever if I didn't do my job well enough. And that eats at your soul. I don't know how else to say that. Shami was a lawyer for a little bit, but she'd already started writing, I think about halfway through law school, she started writing, transitioned from dungeon mastering us. Sort of towards the end of our time in California, she had a very close friend that was going to be an author that kind of did some things I'm not really supposed to talk about it, but it was dark. And she got very upset by that, but she also missed having another author to talk to and stuff. And so I started writing a book partially just to do that. And then I was at least not bad at it. I'm not as good as Shami, but, in between, could certainly write in my niche markets. And there came a point when, I'd quit my job. She wasn't doing hers, and we were effectively what you call digital nomads, where we can make our money anywhere. And I quit. She's given me that as I don't have to be an attorney anymore, is what she's really done for me. And so after I stopped being an attorney, which at this point I think is 3 years ago this coming August, then we just decided that Wichita was more wholesome, more friendly, less crime, way less expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we just transitioned out. It was effectively like giving us a huge pay raise. We cut our mortgage in half and added like a third of an acre to our backyard and 33% to the size of our house and got dogs. So,
Heck yeah.
And still effectively have a larger income. I mean, I know that's an incredibly mundane answer. I'm supposed to speak of the, spiritual wonderfulness of being an author or something like that. But,
but you know what?
That's the path.
Exactly. And each path is different. And, like you said, it may be a mundane answer, but that's your answer.
Yeah. Part of the reason I got into it is when Shami, I didn't even know about Kindle Unlimited. I had no idea that was a thing. I was still doing physical books. But when Shami was starting out, I like to watch numbers. I like to watch things grow over time. And so I just started watching all of her numbers. But in order to do that, I had to get Kindle Unlimited to see stuff change. And then I discovered that on Kindle Unlimited, they have a bunch of books. I know that sounds stupid, but didn't know about it, wasn't aware. And that's when I discovered Dungeon Core, and I loved it so much that I guess that was the second half of the equation that got me to actually write something. As I was like, man, I've been dungeon mastering myself for like 40 years almost. I could do this. I could write something like this. So.
And speaking of Dungeon Core, I'm assuming that's kind of what led you into the Dungeon Core series. Or Dungeon of Stories series, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had a couple really early on. I found my path into this. So I got the Kindle Unlimited, and I was looking at normal science fiction books. And one of Shami's friend's brothers I know that sounds like a really strange connection, but we were all at a party together and we just started talking. And he was like, you have to check out Cradle. And most people in the genre know Cradle's this huge, big deal, so I checked it out and I fell in love with Cradle. And when I was done with that series, the Amazon also bots told me to check out The Land by Alaron Kong. And I know he's controversial, but he'll always have a place in my heart because that was my first lit RPG and it blew my damn mind. And then when I was done with that, the also bots told me to check out Divine Dungeon by Dakota Kraut. And that blew my damn mind and was amazing. And then I was in Dungeon Core for a while and I read The Hapless Dungeon Fairy by Jonathan Brooks. And it's going to sound weird. It's a great series. I don't want to in any way be insulting, but it ended in a way I didn't want it to end, I guess. I guess what finally got me going is I wanted to write a book and I was like, dude, I really want to write the same story that Jonathan Brooks wrote, but with like a different ending. And I want to write it the way Divine Dungeon was written. And so that's what I tried to do. There was very little original creativity. I just took my two favorite Dungeon Core stories and kind of mashed them together, I guess, and made my own thing. I will say, though, the power system, extremely unique, all my own, totally new. Story, not so much, but the power system, by God, that is new and different.
So this is basically where, when you got onto Kindle Unlimited, this is where you kind of met into lit RPG. We're into that genre of it. You started reading it first and then kind of evolved it from there. Obviously, like you were saying, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, similar board tabletop games prior to that.
It's going to sound really weird, but Shami's quite successful, but I still want to see more. And it's not because I want like more money or anything. I just want to watch it grow. I don't know how else to explain it. I know that sounds really bizarre, but I love just watching it creep along, grow in different directions, do things like, I don't know how else to explain it. It's just, I just like watching it for its own sake. Like, everybody has their weird things. Some guys like fishing. I play like deeply hardcore economic simulators, basically. And so Shami's business is basically a real life hardcore economic simulator, and it amuses me for its own sake. Not, you know what I mean? I don't know how else to explain it. Yeah.
You sit there like, yay.
Yeah. It's just fun to watch. It's just fun to watch.
So as far as you guys both being authors, do you and Shami bounce ideas off of each other since you're both authors, or do you like kind of like stay in each other's corners, or?
No, we do a ton of idea bouncing. It really just depends. I'm pretty sure that nothing in the Frith Chronicles is actually me. I'm almost positive that's almost 100% Shami, but some of the other books that she's written, it's all her writing, but a fair of the ideas were mine. And in the other direction, it's even more substantial. Corrupted Core is 8% Shami by volume. I figured out because I wrote the whole story, but then she went through, added a lot of stuff, descriptions, changed things around, etc. And it ends up that literally 1 word in 12 in that book is her writing. Now, some of the books, City of Mask is pretty much close to 100% mine. Superhero Dungeon, almost 100% mine. Elf Empire's a lot more hers, me writing, but she gave me a lot of ideas. But the latest one, Dungeon Card Enforcer, the story is actually almost entirely Shami's. I literally borrowed one of her old stories with her permission. It's a jointly owned business, so she's helping herself, helping me help herself. But again, the power system is uniquely mine, like 100% uniquely mine. But a lot of the story was based entirely on a Shami story, so that one's very, very heavily hers. It really just depends, I guess. I would say I borrow ideas from her significantly more than she borrows from me, but it's not, a one-way street. She certainly gets ideas from me.
But I feel like even as an author, like having somebody just talk to, even just that interaction, I imagine would be significant as well.
I don't know. Are you one of the beta readers for Time Marked Warlock?
Yep.
Yeah. Have you read the second one yet?
No.
Okay. It won't make sense then, so never mind. But some of the stuff that happens in the second book was from the results of us talking, but it was like a 3-step process. Like she had an idea, I had a new idea, and then she had an idea off of that one type of thing. But yeah, the talking it out really does help considerably.
Now, do you guys like alpha read each other's works, or do you just kind of like have, once you get it done, you send it off to somebody else and have them edit it and beta read it?
Really depends. It does take a lot of effort to significantly alpha read something. I think I alpha read every single book in the Frith Chronicles, although 1 or 2 of them I don't think I did as fast as she needed for some of the help in the late series, like 6 or 7, I think, maybe. I haven't done, I alpha read, I think, the first, but not the second through 4th of the Academy Arcanist series. I pretty hardcore alpha read, like alpha and beta read, basically. I read multiple times, and for pleasure as well, the Time Marked Warlock books. So it really just depends. She very hardcore alpha read the first and second Elf Empire, and then the first half of the third one. I was doing them in arcs. So the first 3 books are 8 arcs, 3 arcs, 2 arcs, 3 arcs. And so she read the first 7 arcs, I think. And then, at a certain point, the people that like the story. And it's not really necessary to keep quite the same level of alpha read carefulness, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. So it just really, the earlier in the series, the more likely we are to do it with each other's work. But it does take a lot of extra time. I mean, every time she alpha reads one of my stories, you guys lose 5 chapters. So, there's a price to be paid. Yeah, I tell her a lot of times she'll say something. She's like, "Do you think this will fly?" And I'm like, "Look, man, it's book 3. They're already in. They're fine. It'll go." But if it's in book 1, I'm like, "Yeah, maybe."
So during our most recent podcast episode, we did discuss the possibility of the Frith Chronicles could have ended up as a trilogy with a tragic ending, and this is where Scott was at when he started reading the Frith Chronicles series in the early days. Did you two ever discuss that may be a possibility, that maybe the Frith Chronicles was going to end earlier than expected? Less than 8 books.
Originally, I think she had planned it for 5, but some of the books started getting away from her. Like I think 6 and 7 were supposed to be a single book, for example, and that she just kept writing and writing and writing, and it ended up being 2 books. I don't think I ever heard it as a tragic trilogy, but I heard it as a possible 5-book novel. But I think 3 and or maybe 4 and 5 separated into 2 books, and then 6 and 7 separated into 2 books. So I think it just kind of grew. Also, I don't know if you noticed the length of the books get longer, I think, in almost every series. I think maybe not of all of her works, but I think ironically the Frith Chronicles is one of the ones I had the least input on at the time, which, might call into question my skills since that's her most successful one. But anyway, but I think of all of her series, that's probably the one I had the least direct feedback on.
Now, I know that Shami regularly posts on the writing group's whiteboard on Facebook, and she regularly pumps out about 100,000 words each and every month. And I know you're matching those insane numbers as well, and basically as many months. And your first book, The Corrupted Core, was published back in June of 2021. And then you've gone on to written 14 to 15 books in those 3 years since.
Yeah, I've done 16 at this point.
How? Oh my gosh, how?
Well, I joked with somebody else on a podcast that there's no real healthy way to be an author, but there's no real healthy way to do anything successfully except be like a Nepo baby, I guess. I mean, Shani writes more than me. I do write more than probably the average author, but I think she writes 20. I think we actually figured it out. She writes about 20,000 words more a month than me on average.
Goodness.
She also maintains a little bit more of the business type of stuff and does way more social media than I do. So I think the real answer is there's not a super healthy way to be successful. You just have to work your ass off. I don't have a better... I mean, the truth of the matter is, compared to being an attorney, this is vastly superior. I work about the same as I did as an attorney, but the stress levels are wildly lower, just so much lower. So I guess for me, this doesn't really feel like that big of a deal. I don't know how much you've talked to Shami about it, but even in the I think it was only 6 years that she was out of college. She got a law degree, was a university professor, taught autistic children, just a bunch of... She spent a year in the drug courts and stuff like that. I guess it's just sort of always been the speed. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah, that's pretty much just always been the speed.
So do you have like a set amount of words you want to type every day? Or do you have a set amount of time that you tell yourself you're going to sit down and write that day? Or is it just kind of I guess, are you a pantser or a planner, or, how do you decide at the end of the day that you're good?
I'm in between. The first 2 books I wrote, I pantsed entirely, but they were Dungeon Core, and Dungeon Core is extremely formulaic. I always laugh at romance novels, but I do it with a certain degree of self-awareness, because you know how a romance novel is going to go. You also know how a Dungeon Core novel is going to go. The first Dungeon Core novel is almost always extremely, extremely similar. So it was a little bit easier then. The most recent story I'm working on, I did an extremely full outline before I started it. And with Dungeon Card Enforcer, I was following Shami's outline for the story. So for those 2, I essentially had complete full outlines effectively. So it's kind of in between. As to how much I write, My goal, and I've only done this a couple times in my life, I don't write 100,000 words a month. I've done it a few times, but that's not what I usually hit. My books usually tend to be about 105, 110,000 words on average. I've had it go anywhere from about 85 to 150, but they tend towards the lower end of that spectrum. And I've done essentially just shy of 6 books a year. So you could do the math and figure out that I'm writing about 50 to 55,000 words a month on a complete average. My goal is to hit the 100,000, which would be 3,100 words a day most months. So I usually try to aim for 2 chapters a day, and then if there's like a day where I'm super busy or something, it'll eat into the existence. But the truth of the matter is I'm not as successful as I'd like to be.
For those that don't speak author, when you're talking about like thousands of words, and I know we've talked about this, but for those that don't also know, I think 100,000 words is how long of a book is that in pages roughly? Or 150,000
on Amazon, it would be about 450.
450 is about that 100,000
on Amazon ebook. I don't really know how to translate it in hardcover or softcover anymore, but
Okay.
Amazon ebook would be about 450 pages.
Okay, because like I said, I remember first hearing you guys talk about it, especially at that the MarsCon. There was everybody's about word counts, and I'm like, what? Can we translate this, please? I'm sorry, I don't speak author yet.
Yeah, a real easy way to think about it would be, with the exception of 1 month, the first month I quit after being an attorney, I didn't do anything for a straight 30 days. Did not write a word, did not do anything. But other than that, the minimum I've ever written in a month is a fifth of a book, and the maximum I've ever written in a month is a full book.
Oh my gosh.
My average writing rate is basically half a book a month. So if that helps people understand what I was saying earlier.
And that's how you're just able to keep pumping them out. And so do you follow a schedule throughout the week, or do you just kind of, okay, I'm going to sit down and write today, or do you kind of leave yourself open to writing?
I have a pattern. I don't know if it's an exact schedule. I have a pattern. The dogs dictate a lot of my life right now. I get up every morning. I'm always up 1 to 3 hours before Shami wakes up. Like, she sleeps considerably more than I do. I usually, get the dogs fed, get them dealt with and stuff like that. Sit down, deal with messages, because a lot of this job is like social media and stuff like that. I mean, most of the time I'll have messages on Railroad, messages on Patreon, messages on Facebook, stuff like that. And then usually I start trying to knock a chapter out like right before she wakes up, get a little bit done. And then when she gets up, we eat, do stuff like that. And then it just depends on the day. We almost have like a reverse schedule. Like, our weekend is our work time, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then Monday through Thursday is usually when we're hanging out with people more, doing things. We have 2 scheduled game groups we meet with. The writers group is on Monday, stuff like that. So we have kind of a inverted schedule, and usually I'm done by midnight and just hanging out after that. And frequently Shami starts writing around 10 at night. I think the one disadvantage to me, having been an attorney for 13 years, like after the fact, is that it's much, much harder for me to perform in the evening, whereas I work much better during the day. And I don't write well at night usually. So certain times, if there's like a lot of chores that need to be done, and places we have to go, or the dogs need to go somewhere to get taken care of or something like that, it can mess with my writing pretty significantly. But that's what I try to maintain. And I usually mentally tell myself I'm going to try to do a chapter each of those 4 days and 2 chapters each of the weekend days would give me about my 3,000, but I'm not usually that successful. But that's my sort of mental goal.
Okay. Yeah, and I completely understand being an early person. I was in the Marine Corps for 8 years, so I'm normally like, as soon as I'm up, I'm awake, I'm moving, I'm going. My wife looks at me, she's like, I haven't even had coffee yet. Shut up. Now, do you remember hearing a rumor that all the members of your writing group are self-published authors? Is that correct?
It is not correct, but it is only one person incorrect. Every single person in our writers group either came to the writing group as a self-published author or has since become a self-published author, except one. But I believe that person will self-publish within about 6 weeks.
Now, is that because of the group, or is that because of them realizing the advantages of self-publishing over traditional?
So technically speaking, I believe of the 8 people in our writers group, 4 of them have been traditionally published at one point or another at this stage. Possibly 5. I know somebody published like 10 or 15 years ago, but their books were brought down almost immediately, and I can't remember what the circumstances were or why. That person has since published other things. You've talked to Shami a lot, right, about this?
Yeah, here there, but I always like to hear everybody, different views on it.
So my experience is her experience. Okay.
Okay.
So I didn't really start watching her until she self-published because I could see the numbers and things like that. But she was a traditionally published author for a couple novels and magazines before that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was at least 2 separate publishing companies, and I think at least 3 novels and some magazines, I believe. It was wretched. The experience was wretched. The money was wretched. Everything was wretched. I hated it for her. I think I'm more negative about it than she is, but, not a good experience. And so I've seen her be extraordinarily successful when she's in charge of her own destiny. So I guess that probably comes through with the people that joined our group. Do you know who Ryan Tang is?
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah, so he's currently doing fairly well. He's got Tower Apocalypse and Mimic and Me are probably the 2 series he's known most for, and Mimic and Me's doing pretty well. He technically started traditionally published as well, and his first series wasn't really supported, made almost no money, and then the company tossed him. So, and then he joined our writers group, and within about a year and a half, I think he's now had 2 series that are pretty successful. I think they're financially relatively, he can support himself type of thing. I'm not saying, obviously you get the Brandon Sandersons and whatever. There's obviously some extraordinarily successful, traditionally published people, but I'm very skeptical. And I know the numbers because I pay a lot of attention to numbers. There are more 6-figure self-published authors than there are 6-figure traditionally published authors, even though there's like people that have been traditionally published for 40 years and nobody's been self-published for more than about, 12 at this point.
Wow. So it's a fairly new thing.
Yeah, it's fairly new, and it's already more lucrative for the authors. Now, I don't know about total receipts, but there's so many hands in the pie that the authors aren't making as much money. So I'm very pro self-publishing, and I've come out that way a lot at our writers group, and frankly talked some smack on traditional publishing. So it's probably had an influence on the decisions they've made. I know that at least a couple of the people that have since become self-published never even tried to go the traditional publishing route, like never applied to anybody. Now, I think only 3 of us are doing it well enough to be full-time, but I get the feeling a 4th one's going to be there pretty soon. And a 5th one could have. I think she's just frankly happier with, raising chickens out in North Carolina than, making millions of dollars. But she had some stuff that was hitting pretty hard before she just kind of voluntarily slowed do you have anybody else from your group that you would like to recommend for everybody to check out in addition? So I feel like Shami's just above everybody in terms of writing capability and skill. But if you're asking for somebody that's not Shami, I feel like anybody that likes my work will probably like Ryan Tang's Mimic and Me. It is a humorous lit RPG. I'm not really known as a humor writer, but lit RPG writer, and he did run some of that through the group and stuff like that. And I do, I got to warn you, it's a harem book, but I recommend Monster Girl Dungeon from Danielle Maines. I actually worked on the system on that one as well, so that book's 3 or 4% me. So I do recommend that one to people as well.
Okay,
but I always put a warning. It's only if you're into harem bro stuff. So. Otherwise, don't do it.
So kind of getting a little bit more into your books here, because obviously I can't have an interview with you and not talk about yours. I did do a little bit of homework here. I decided I did read some of your books. I kind of dipped my toes into the lit RPG world back in January and kind of have been intrigued with it since, and especially with getting the idea and having you on as a interview and talking to you as an author. I've been starting to read some of your books as well, the Corrupted Core series, and I'm going to fanboy real quick, okay? Because I love Will, and I love the humor of it. And I know you just said you're not much, you're not known for humor, but I love the little puns, the little nuances. When I read when Will said "thank Jeebus," Jeebus, I just about died laughing. Like my wife was asleep at that point, and I'm pretty sure I woke her up because I was laughing so hard from reading that line.
Dude, that's actually something Shami says regularly. So that's where I actually got that from. But yeah,
When and I can remember is it from Simpsons. I'm not sure if that's where it came from, but
it may
that
have
was like
originally. I have a lot of internet lingo that I pick up secondhand, so
a
that's the best way I can explain it. Most of anything I know about current culture comes through Shami. So
well, it's like Simpsons was like a staple for us on Sunday afternoon. It was either the race if the NASCAR race wasn't on, it was the Simpsons for us. So, but yeah, I love this the Corrupted Core series. I love the way that you bring in from the dungeon's point of view, and again, me just barely even like getting myself green behind the ears with lit RPG in general. I don't know if that's like a common thing, but I absolutely love that. And
it's extremely common.
okay,
I said this early on, but I literally tried to write Jonathan Brooks' Hapless Dungeon Fairy with a different ending in the style of Dakota Kraut's Divine Dungeon. So power system, 100% me. That very unique. A lot of people liked it. I'm sort of known for interesting and complex power systems, but the style and the basic story outline, I borrowed heavily from other people's. I mean, nothing is copyright, obviously. I changed characters, changed names, different things, different number of people, all that kind of stuff.
right.
But the basic patterns that you see were two of my favorite Dungeon Core stories.
And just to understand more of the lit RPG genre, because again, I'm fairly new to it still. Is it more so the power system? Is that more so kind of like what I would say the biggest differences between different lit RPGs? Or
I wouldn't say it's the biggest difference between lit RPGs. Lit RPGs are pretty different, but for Dungeon Cores, the power system is the biggest difference. Okay, the first book in a Dungeon Core is extremely formulaic. I mentioned that earlier, but you're going to see the same thing. Somebody wakes up, they're a stone, they learn to use their powers, they meet the cool adventuring party, somebody comes and threatens them. There's a very, very formulaic approach to Dungeon Core. I call it theme park porn. It's just to see the new different theme park. Okay, like this is about a dungeon that makes all of its monsters out of like robots and stuff like that. This is a dungeon that does dinosaurs. This is a dungeon that does, X, Y, or Z. Mine was an economics dungeon. I know that sounds bizarre, but my power sets were very heavily about economics, growth rates. I used probably the most complicated math in any book I've done in that one. So mine was the Dungeon Core Economics Theme Park Edition, if you want to look at it that way. So Dungeon Core, it is the same story to a certain degree, and there has been a collapse. I follow the numbers. The number of people reading Dungeon Core has gone down pretty dramatically. I think a lot of theme parks have been exhausted, and now people are starting to realize it's the same story over and over. But lit RPG is pretty damn different. A lot of different ways it's done. Shami has a lit RPG, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I started listening to Nexus games.
So, if you take something like the Nexus game, so that's a very dark, very gritty, lots of real black humor, very action packed, dead people everywhere. I mean, Hunger Games style story set in a really dark dystopian Magitech universe. And then you compare it to something like Beware of Chicken, which is a cozy about a guy with powers that farms and raises a family and has his animals become sentient and has magic, and it's all just chill. I think in 2 books, one person dies in 2 books, or main character killed. So I just feel like those are both technically, I mean, I guess Beware of Chicken's technically progression fantasy, not lit RPG, but they're extraordinarily different books. I feel like the only thing that lit RPG really means is we applied a system to a book, and then everybody just started writing 1,000 different styles of books again with a system in place. I mean, some of them are standard adventures, some of them are space operas, some of them are dark dystopian grimdark worlds, some of them are, like monster evolution stories, like stories of cats growing up to become cat monsters and their homes being threatened. There's 1,000 million different ones. I feel like lit RPG isn't a genre; it's a description of a system being applied to a genre. Now, most of them cluster in sort of classic like male adventure fantasy stories, but most of it is a key point. So, Dungeon Core, very formulaic, very similar, but it's really just one branch of lit RPG. Lit RPG itself, I think, is extremely broad. I feel like there's, if you liked the Frith Chronicles, you can find books that in many ways have a very similar vibe in lit RPG space, but just finding a lit RPG doesn't mean you're finding something like that. You know what I mean? I feel like that's actually a little bit of a problem with it, because when people say, "Oh, what's a cool new lit RPG?" It's a
You're like, it's got to be.
Yeah.
You got to define that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of?
yeah. Give me a little bit more. Give me a little bit more.
That's just like saying, "Oh, I want to read a fantasy book." Like, okay, like what kind of fantasy are you looking for?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So there's even some very famous lit RPGs that I just do not like at all. But on the other hand, there's a couple ones that are very small following, and I'm like, man, this is just amazing. And sometimes I think it's just because what percentage of the audience was it designed to appeal to, rather than the quality of the book.
Okay. Now, who would you say is your favorite character in the favorite series that you have created till now?
Hugh in Elf Empire is probably my favorite. I really like Hugh. I have a real hard time getting characters that I think really resonate with people, that have especially secondary characters that both have a strong screen presence and aren't dominating the story. And Hugh, I think, is the best one for that. I think most people like him. He's the bro dragon, but he's a bro dragon that technically starts out crippled, and he's got goals, but they don't in any way contest with the main character, but they're still unique to him. He's got his own things going on. He's doing his own things. He feels very real, especially for what's a baby dragon, essentially. I feel like he's probably one of the most fully realized characters I've ever had. He's also very different. Most of my characters are self-inserts to a certain degree, and I try really hard to get away from that, but I fail a lot of the time. Hugh is 100% not like me at all, but he's still a fully realized character, and I love him. So I guess part of it's more like, this is a character I feel good about myself, like I did a good job writing him. And he's almost 100% me, as opposed to a lot of characters that people really like had a lot of Shami in them. Now, the 3 chapters that I think people like the most, Shami did have a fair amount of time like tweaking, but it wasn't like she tweaked story beats. It was like she tweaked the writing, if you get what I'm saying. And so I guess I'm just really proud of him is, a large part of it, because I feel like he's some of my best writing ever. So probably Hugh. After that's probably Will. Now, Will is 100% a self-insert. I've joked about this. I think I talked with you about you, but when I first started reading Dungeon Core, like Shami would be trying to go to bed and I'd roll over and start poking her. And, in normal circumstances, I'd be a guy being like, "Hey, you feeling frisky?" But no, I'd be like, "What kind of Dungeon Core are you?" And she'd be like, "John, I'm trying to sleep." And I'm like, "Yeah, but if you had to pick an elemental magic, what kind of Dungeon Core would you be?" And this is going to sound really crazy, but I fantasized a lot about becoming a Dungeon Core and what kind of Dungeon Core I would be. And the answer was Will. So I guess I like Will because he was my first and because he's like me. But I like Hugh because he's probably the best character that isn't like me that I've ever realized, is the best way I could explain it.
Not you.
Yeah.
Now, Dan did also recommend that I check out Wolf and Shell and the Demon Card Enforcer. And can you kind of give us a little bit more information on that?
So that is, Shami wrote a story, and I really liked that story. And I wanted to tell a magical version of that story. All right. So the first book has gone through some revisions. It's not the same story as Shami's, but a lot of it is hers. And more importantly, the major characters are 100% personality based on hers, which has made it easy. Shell in particular, especially in the first book, she directly rewrote 2 or 3 of the very key scenes, including she basically just made an entire chapter for me out of nowhere to make Shell resonate more. It's an urban fantasy story and very gritty. Maybe not very gritty, but fairly gritty, fairly dark. Character starts as an enforcer for a mob, and he's got a very dark backstory about why he ended up in that place. And speaking of Ryan Tang, I was working with him because Ryan Tang has a partially completed card story, and I was working with card systems on him, and I came up with this card system, and this was all me again, 100% me. This is the one I claim. Okay, the system is me. Okay, the story is other people, but by God, I made this system. Okay, this is a cool system that everybody loves. That was me. But Shami said something to me once, and she said, "Everything in your book should serve the story, not the other way around." And so I think the idea that's really unique to Demon Card Enforcer for lit RPG type stuff is he doesn't just play cards. Cards can be played on himself to make him able to fight in the game. Like, he can always do so, and they can make him stronger, and I call them mantles. And I know that's like a small thing, but it allows my character to be directly involved in the card game fighting instead of just like a Yu-Gi-Oh! style thing. Like his life is in danger, directly, and he can risk himself to influence the outcome of things directly. And I made a whole bunch of cards. I've got like 80 or 90 cards now for it. I'm really good at like interlocking systems and stuff. And so I basically took her story and said that some of the key characters in the story all have one card in a set of cards where if you own all those cards, you get something super, super cool. And they have their existing conflicts they had in her book. What happens is Shell is an extremely young, naive, like I think she's 19, girl that's trying to get vengeance for her brother that was killed by one of the gangs. And she encounters Wolf and they kind of team up to defeat X gang, but there's some other stuff, some darkness in their own mob group and whatever going on. And it's in many ways a story of his redemption from the path of evil. And it's all based on characters Shami wrote, but with my systems overlaid. And I'm pretty sure it's almost 100% with the exception of one chapter and a couple lines for Shell, me writing it, but following her outline pretty closely in the first edition and fairly closely in the rewrite. That's the one that's up on Railroad now. And so it's basically just an urban fantasy with a complicated card system instead of the normal magical powers you would see. So think, Dresden Files, but with a card game in order to inflict magic on people. Best way I could say it.
And you're just like, I just want the numbers to go. Brrr.
Dude, I love numbers going burr. It's actually, so I think I've talked about this a couple times throughout this, but I feel like I'm sort of weaker at traditional writing stuff, like, getting those really strong moments, really good descriptions, characters that really pop out of the page at you. But the things I'm good at are the things that are like systems. And it's not just systems like that. A lot of people have commented that I'm really good at pacing. Like people will be in book 4 and they'll be like, man, this has held its pacing. It's never gone completely insane. It's never dropped off. The story holds itself together throughout, 600,000 words. But yeah, that's, those are my,
but you're not
my
spending
directions.
3 pages. Sorry.
Wait, go ahead.
I was going to say, but you're not spending 3 pages describing a tree, right?
Oh no. Actually it was one of those fun things, funny little stories from my start as a writing career. So I wrote Corrupted Core and I was very proud of myself, wrote it very quickly. I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks to knock out a 100,000 word story. The first time I did it. And I handed it to Shami like a little kid, handing his parents his, nice new drawing from kindergarten or something like that. And she read through the entire story and she's like, John, this is probably the 4th most important character in your entire story. You've never described them. Ever. You gave them a name. They show up. They do things. I know they carry a bow. I know what their power set is. I don't know what they look like. I don't know how thin they are. I don't know how tall they are. I don't know what their eye color is. I don't know what their hair color is. I don't know what their voice sounds like. I only know they're a woman because you use she, her type pronouns. So just, yeah, I had a whole complicated, Y to the X function math system backing up a character that never even had an eye color. So, yeah. So I've definitely been doing it backwards from how most people do it.
Hey, but if it works for you, it works for you, You can't.
Yeah.
So as far as like other series goes outside of your own, maybe personal favorites as far as books or authors that you haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I mentioned, so I think I'm kind of weird. I think my favorite lit RPG is Dungeon Crawler Carl. Or let me rephrase that. I think the best written lit RPG is probably Dungeon Crawler Carl. Okay. And I really like that series just a whole lot. But my first lit RPG was The Land by Alaron Kong. And so it has like nostalgia value for me. So it's kind of like 50-50. But if anybody's looking for like a super weird, like off kilter gem to discover, I think Nathan, I'm going to say it wrong, but Amyre, like Amyere, I believe, his Black Dawn trilogy that would be my best off-meta recommendation is the best way I could put it. If people are looking for lit RPGs, they already know the other books I talked about, but a lot of people that would be looking for, a lot of people that might be interested in hearing me talk probably know all the other books I talked about. But I feel like a lot of people would know the Black Dawn trilogy and they would benefit from checking it out. It's a very well told story with an extremely interesting system. It's one of the few other books where I'm like, this system is really exciting and different and new from everything I've seen before. So a lot of people that follow me do so for the systems. I've been told that like very, very clearly. They like my really cool, magical system. And Nathan Amyre has a fascinating magical system in his Black Dawn book. Just absolutely fascinating. So And it's a pretty good story on top of that. I mean, it's not like the best story I've ever written or read, but it's very solid. And when you add in the extremely good magical system, that's one of my like all time like, you know, diamond in the rough recommendations. When people want something new they haven't read before, if they're in my space, I usually recommend that one.
Okay, awesome. Now, going back to the Frith Chronicles here, when did you realize that Shami was really onto something with when she first started writing?
Instantly. Shami and I have like a couple moments. This is going to sound weird, but I joke that I'm an investment gold digger. Shami is frankly just better than me and more successful than me, just period, pretty much across the board. But I think I helped her at key moments in her life because I started with a lot of resources. I was born into an extremely successful nuclear family, and I think she was born to a wino mother that was terrible. So I just had advantages she didn't have at certain points, and I was able to, transfer some of those to her and help her up a little bit. But I was also never confused. One of my weird special powers is I can always tell when people are cool and are going to be very successful. All of my high school friends went on to make, at a minimum, hundreds, plural, of thousands of dollars a year, like every single person I chose to hang with. The very first day I met Shami, I was a hirer for Blockbuster, and the only person I ever said, you have to hire this person, was Shami. I was like, this person is special and different and cool, and you need to hire them right away because, they're gonna do amazing things. It wasn't for Blockbuster, though, it turned out, but, she did do amazing things. But she went to law school, and partway through law school, she wrote an entire 200,000 word book, and she didn't even tell me about it until one day she basically just handed me a book and was like, ta-da, I wrote a book. What do you think? And so I read the book, and I think I read the whole thing in one day. And it was not perfect. It's not the level of quality you see her writing now. It was the very first book she ever wrote, type of thing. But it was the very first book she ever wrote, was absolutely engaging, had a insanely powerful moment at the end of it, like tearjerker, like basically on par with the end of book 8 in the Frith Chronicles, the second to last chapter. And every character was distinct and different and interesting. And I was instantly like, you could make your career as an author, 100%. This is at the level that, like, your first book could probably make money. I can only wait to imagine, a later book. And so, yeah, instantly. I mean, within 24 hours, I think, of her telling me she wanted to be an author, I knew she was going to be successful. Although I have to say, Shami's never not successful. So it's not like the hardest bet in the world.
So what is one of your favorite books from her series?
1 second. I need to ask her something before I talk about something.
Okay.
1 sec. All right. So Shami has 2 books. Well, technically she has 3 books now that are in my top 10 list of all-time books. Okay. And some of my all-time books are things like Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. So very high-level stuff. I don't know if you've read it, but the first one is Star Mark Rising.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so she wrote a science fiction space opera that I think personally could stand alongside the absolute best science fiction in the world. Okay, it is exciting and interesting, but it also has an incredible amount to say. The Frith Chronicles has a lot to say, but it's very traditional. Be a good person, try to be the hero, stop badness, risk yourself for the benefit of others, stuff like that. I feel like there's some real deeply intellectual and philosophical things in Star Mark Rising. I love that series. I think it was the first time I ever had like a serious physical reaction to one of her books. The end scene is one of the most powerful, and never seen it. My father, who I think you've probably heard, but has passed away a couple of weeks ago. He said to her, I think the best description of it, he said, I'm 30 pages from the end. I have no idea how it's going to end, and I have to know. Okay. And that was before the moment that I think is one of the 5 or 6 best moments he's ever written. Okay. So that one is one of the top 3. The second one is the new Time Marked Warlock 2 book. Okay. I loved Time Marked Warlock 1. Time Marked Warlock 2 is even better. Okay. But Time Marked Warlock 2 is like peak happiness throughout the whole book. It's a very different experience than most of her writing, which I think has real poignant moments a lot of the time, or but the book that I always weirdly hesitate is she wrote a book that she's never published and probably never will publish.
Okay.
It is, at the time she wrote it in 2016, it was extremely predictive of a lot of stuff we've seen happening over the last 5 or 6 years. Okay. It was also a crazy political firecracker. And I don't mean like, and on every side, I think it would have offended 100% of
Everybody.
anybody with a strong political opinion. Okay. Just absolutely on every side. And I'm not going to talk about it, which is because I don't want to get her in trouble. But I think it had more to say accurately about human nature and what is going on in the Western world than almost anything I've ever read. And it did so with some of the most powerful scenes I've ever read. Again, stuff on par with Book 8's ending. All right. I always weirdly joke that there are some benefits to being married to a world-class author, one of which is I've read 12 books that nobody will ever read. And 11 of them were, well, that's not true. 10 of them were fantastic. One I don't care for. And one of them is a genius level work that I think would have been probably damaging if it had gone out. So, and that is my, it's called, it won't say anything, but it's called Queenswater Academy. And that is one of my top 10 all-time favorite books of like all time. I've read it multiple times. It's incredibly powerful and nobody else will ever read it. So I'm sorry. I know that's like a weird fucked up thing to say, but yeah, insanely powerful, insanely deep philosophy, so much to say. I mean, I'm just singing her praises. It's probably cheesy at some point, but she is somebody that came from nothing, that somehow managed to get a Juris Doctorate, best-selling author, Dragon Award nominee, university professor, all that shit, and she ain't even 40.
She's not a day over 25, right?
Yeah. So I feel like some of the absolute most significant intellectual work she ever did was in that Queenswater Academy, and I love that book to death. That one and Starmark Rising are probably two of the deepest philosophical, intellectual works I've ever read. What am I trying to say? Perused, while still being an amazing story as opposed to an actual treatise on philosophy. And I think the happiest I've ever been reading a book was probably Time Mark Warlock 2. So I think, I know this is the Frith Guild's podcast, and I'm supposed to probably say that's my favorite series. It's not my favorite series.
Hey, it's your opinion.
I like those books. I've read everything. I've read every single book in the series, the primary Frith series twice. So I think, yeah. And the third and fourth books I've read like 5 or 6 times each. I like that series, but for me, it's a step down from her other writing, to be honest with you. Now, it was intentionally aimed at a young adult audience, so that may be part of the reason I'm not as into it, because I was a deep, hardcore science fiction reader before she started doing stuff. So she, some of these other books are just more directly aimed at me, I guess. But yeah, top 10 novels of all time, 3 of them are Shami's and 2 of them other people can read. So.
No, if you would have to guess, what book in your series or what series of yours is her favorite?
Oh, she likes, I'm going to be 100% honest here. She's not that fond of my work. She does not like Dungeon Core specifically, which is a significant portion of my work. However, she does like Will for the exact same reasons that you said. She likes alien stuff, like somebody discovering new abilities and being very different from a human. She likes people that are happy. She likes the joking. So probably Corrupted Core, but even then, unfortunately, her appreciation of my work is not as high as my appreciation of her work. I understand why, because I'm not as good as she is, but that's just that's the truth of the matter.
And there's always room for improvement for you. I mean, and for both of you. So
I don't think there's a whole lot of room for improvement for her, but maybe a little bit.
Now, what kind of Eldrin would you want as your companion if you were in the Frith Chronicles series?
The problem is I would always pick power tiers. Okay. So if there was a God Arcanist, or think of it like I would never pick a God Arcanist one because you only get like 10 or 20 years and then you get murdered. But the ones right below it, yeah. The ones right below it, like the Mother of Shapeshifters and stuff like that. I would pick something like that, even if it wasn't necessarily my favorite, simply because the power level is very, very high. If I was just picking on cool factor, the Rizzle. I like teleporting. I like dimensional magic. I like all that kind of stuff, and I would want to explore whatever possible extent of the powers I could push that to. If I could find a dragon that was based around dimensional powers, I would want said dragon. Shami has never canonly approved one, but we have talked about that kind of stuff, and that would be if there was a dimensional dragon, if there was a Rizzle dragon, that's my pick. But if you just forced me, you get any one that's been in the series, it would probably be the Mother of Shapeshifters just for the sheer power of it. If not, probably the Sovereign Dragon, because it's a Empire influencing build, and I really don't have a lot of desire to just run out and kick somebody's ass. I would rather build and grow and make things cool. And if I could do so by being fat and lazy and being like, guys, I put out an R that makes everybody lots of money, so give me like 5% and let me do whatever I want. That's a very John build. So,
hang back in my chair and
yeah. But in terms of just cool factor, Rizzle, 100% Rizzle. I would have been a Rizzle Arcanist if I was in the early stages before I knew about the other stuff. If I was on that island, I'd have been like, move over.
You're going for the Rizzle, not the swamp creature.
So everybody else is like, wow, the cool Shadow Knight in his armor. And I'm like, give me the Rizzle any day of the week.
Yeah, man, that's one of those, oh my God, that's such a cool Shadow Knight. But then dragons.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I would take the Rizzle. Also, I find Nickolin absolutely hilarious. I do not think there is a page Nickolin is on that I haven't laughed my ass off. And I actually, in one of my other books, the City of Mass books, now they show up late or later in the book, but I based 2 creatures specifically kind of somewhat off of Nickolin, which I think is the only thing I've ever taken from the Frith Chronicles, really. I've borrowed a lot of stuff from a lot of her books, but not so much from the Frith Chronicles. But I did steal Nickolin. I love Nickolin.
What guild, assuming that you're Rizzle Arcanist, what guild would you want to go for, or would you go for a guild at all?
I would definitely go for a guild. I'm very much a joiner of those types of things. I would pick some sort of research guild. I can't remember offhand. I don't think there was a research guild per se that was mentioned in the series, even though Adelgis and his father had a lot of research stuff going on. But I would definitely join a guild like that if I was a Rizzle Arcanist. If I was a Sovereign Arcanist, I would just pick a city and make a deal. But Rizzle Arcanist, I would really, the concepts of spatial magic is fascinating and interesting to me. I guess it's that like science fiction background, but I would really like to see what the upper limits of it were and what could be done with it. I mean, obviously in the other series, you start seeing things like dimensional portals and things like that use Rizzle magic, and that I was talking about that stuff with Shami long before that series was working. I don't in any way think she was taking those ideas from me. I'm just saying that that's the kind of stuff I was fascinated by early on. So I was like, what is the limits of this whole bending space and time thing? I would like to know. So yeah, I would join some sort of research guild.
I totally feel like that's like a 2 a.m, just coasting on your buzz at the end of the night, like having these deep intellectual conversations, just like, what if?
Dude, I think I already mentioned this, but Shami and I are on a very different schedule. Like, I'm productive in the morning and kind of coasting in the evening, and she's
gearing
kind of
up in the
morning and super productive in the evening. But it does have a slightly negative effect because sometimes I want to talk in the evening, and she's like, John, I don't want to talk about Rizzle magic right now. I'm busy writing stories. You ask me one more time what kind of dungeon I'm going to be in the middle of writing a chapter. So, yeah. But no, I feel like we do our best talking right in the middle, like when we go out to dinner, usually, which for us is lunch. Like, I know it sounds weird, but that's how we kind of do our schedules is usually around 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening is we go out for quote dinner, but that's our lunch. And I feel like most of our really good conversations about stuff happens like right in that time period.
All right. Moving on to your Discord. I know it's fairly active discussing cards and inventing new cards for Demon Card Enforcer and the sequel Demon Deck Builder. Outside of your books, do you actively play collectible card games like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh, or Pokemon, I guess?
Yes.
You have a favorite of them?
I'm not an avid fan. I encountered them in 1996. I think I was in the first or maybe the second. It was 3rd edition, which I think was the second full edition, like actually released as opposed to Alpha Beta. I think it was Alpha Beta Unlimited 3rd. And I joined during 3rd in Magic. Sadly, I had what was the equivalent of $20,000 worth of double lands that I traded away like 2 years later, but I didn't know that at the time. Nobody knew cards were going to become that expensive. But anyway, I went through like a 3-year phase where I was extremely into the card games. And then I quit for 10 or 12 years. And then I went through like a 2-year phase where I was extremely into the card games. And then I quit for a couple years, and then I went through an 2-year period where I was extremely into the card games, and then I quit again. Now is the only time I'm doing it sort of in between. Now, I did go through like a really hardcore 3-month arena phase, MTG arena phase recently, but I only play usually about once a month. I go down to the local card game store and I do what's called a cube draft, where there's like a pre-made mega deck, but only about half the cards enter the actual game, and then you draft in a circle. I play that. I did recently, like I said, go through a fairly hefty phase, but I got out of it and then sent all my cards to Ryan Tang because he's a more a more solid player than I am. So kind of in between on Magic. I also did the Star Wars collectible card game for a couple years, but that was like 25 years ago at this point. I'm an old man. Other than that, not really. So I've probably been hardcore into TCGs for maybe 7 to 9 years of my life at one point or another, as compared to like, Dungeons and Dragons, like tabletop RPGs, which have been 36 years at this point. I think we were doing one earlier this year with people, and I've invented 2 entire game systems. And I still do like very complicated board games like Terraforming Mars, like 6-hour board game type stuff. I always game, but what that game is does go back and forth for me. And I guess I'm kind of in a bit of an out phase for the card games. And I sometimes think it's because I am writing the story. I tend to lose interest in whatever I'm writing about until I'm done writing about it. And I think it's because my brain already spends 4 to 6 hours a day on it, and it doesn't want to spend more hours a day. I think I left the arena phase of my life almost simultaneously with starting the card game book phase of my life. And it's the best explanation I have. I also don't like the dungeon master. Like Shami in particular, she used to be like a god tier dungeon master, like the best dungeon master you could hope for. Super complex stories, brilliant, crazy ideas. She would make side character sheets. We both do this. I usually make the math system, and she usually makes the world when we make new game stuff. Just hyper complex, the best tabletop games you could ever play. Just absolutely, SSS tier. And as soon as she became an author, her interest in dungeon mastering that stuff just fell through the floor. And she used to do it pretty religiously. Like she would be doing it like twice a week, running like a 6-8 hour game session, hyper complex, super interesting stuff. And she did it kind of sort of for another couple of years, and then she basically quit. And then I took over and was doing all the dungeon mastering. I mean, I always dungeon mastered, but I was doing it pretty much exclusively as opposed to just half the time. And then I started writing, and it kind of dropped off for me as well. And I think it's because I'm writing, we're telling stories already. And in my case, I'm doing all the math and stuff already. And I just think my brain doesn't want to repeat what it's already doing. So I don't know how it is for other authors, but when people are like, wow, are you super into card games? And I was like, before I started writing about card games, they're like, do you love tabletop Dungeons and Dragons? Before I started writing about tabletop Dungeons and Dragons. That's always my answer. And it seems backwards because you're like, well, why would you write about something and then stop playing it? But I think it's because the brain is just doing it already. I'm doing a tabletop game just in my head as opposed to with other people. So that's my weird, probably extra long for the question take on that.
Well, and it maybe makes sense. I mean, you're saying it becomes more of a chore than it does an enjoyment. And after, like you said, spending several hours already in the day doing this and doing that, doing the same thing over and over, you want something different. You want to go play video games. You want to go, I don't know if you want to read more, but read different books. Do literally anything.
Even my reading, I used to be an insane reader. I mean, like upper fraction of a percentage point, I would frequently read more than a book a day for most of my life. There was only 2 points where I haven't done that. One of them was when I was in law school, and that's because they were asking me to read like 150 pages a night anyway, and I got bored and tired of reading. And the other was since I've been an author. Now, I still do read, but I read like maybe a book a week, whereas I used to read seriously like a book and a half or 2 books a day, especially when I first discovered Dungeon Core, man. I would read the absolute shittiest written Dungeon Core you have ever seen in your entire life and love it. Okay. Like if it said Dungeon Core on the cover, I would read that thing. All right. That's how I was. And I read like sometimes like 3 or 4 a day. Okay. I would just blow through those things like crazy. And as soon as I started writing, nowadays I'm lucky if I keep up with like the really famous major releases. So it's interesting the way that's been. I guess that's probably the only thing I don't like about being an author is it's killed my ability to just knock out 4 hours loving life in somebody else's world.
So what kind of any particular advice that you would give to young and upcoming authors that you wish you would have known before you got started yourself?
No, I don't think I would be an author without Shami. 100%. I got a leg up on everything because I was married to a world-class author. I mean, it's just the only advice I have is the advice you would give everybody about everything is you're going to have to work like a dog. If you want to be successful at something, you got to put the time in. There's no other real good answer. I think in my experience, both watching Shami and with myself, you need to find a balance between writing what you love and writing what's popular, but you can't get rid of either one completely. And it's a hard balance because if you just try to turn out commercial stuff, it's going to fall flat because people will be able to feel the lack of passion. But if you just try to turn out what's passionate, you'll be so niche probably that nobody will be interested. You gotta find a middle ground. But I mean, I don't know. I had a very different path to being an author than most people did, and different reasons for being an author than most people did, different concerns. I know this is like kind of a weird, but Shami is sufficiently successful that monetary concerns don't drive me the same way most people would be driven. So I get to make choices they don't have to make, or I get to do things that they're not able to do, I guess, because they have to make certain choices. They have to get enough money to put bills on the table, things like that. So I don't, aside from the generic, you're going to have to work like a dog. There's no easy shortcut. The number of people that write one book and make $1 million is like, 13 over the last 100,000 writers. If you know what I'm saying? Like, right. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to practice. You're going to have to put out 50 books. You're going to have to write every day, even when you don't feel like it. Shami always says, the trick to being successful is to not give up. And it sounds so simple, but it's not, because it might take you 5 years. It might take you 5 years of not going out to eat, of not, of living in a room, of working a full-time job, coming home and putting 6 more hours in every single day. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy at all. It sounds simple, but it's not. But that's what you have to do. That's the, I tell people before, but I watched Shami, even when she, quote, wasn't working, she was working 14 hours a day. You know what I mean? Like, just, I keep telling people there's not a healthy way to do this. You just have to work your ass off. That's the big magical trick. Work like a dog. This is going to sound weird, but one of the things I like about America is that 80% of our billionaires are first-generation billionaires. They came from nothing and made a lot of money. In Europe, 80% of them inherited their money. Only 20% of them are new.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I like that we're still a country of opportunity, but the price of opportunity is sacrificing nearly everything else to be successful. That's just the reality.
All right. Well, we're going to move into the lightning round here as we're getting toward the end. Just kind of quick answers here. What house would you be in Hogwarts?
Ravenclaw.
Are you kind of answered this earlier, but are you a plotter or a pantser now?
Now I'm a plotter. Used to be a pantser, and it's been a rough transition, but I've needed it.
Hardcover or ebooks?
100% ebooks. 100%. I love the convenience.
Tea or coffee?
Neither. I hate them both with a insane passion. Everybody looks at me like a weirdo, but I have the taste buds of a 3-year-old. If it ain't soda or water, I ain't touching it.
Fair enough. I mean, it's probably better than energy drinks, anyways. So
I got off those. I was on those, and those are horrible. But I have not touched them in, I think at this point, 38 days.
Hey, keep strong, man. That was my addiction. Favorite writing spot outside of your desk, or do you exclusively write at your desk?
Exclusively. I used to write on the laptop, but I only did that so that I could be with Shami during periods where she wanted somebody to be around her. And now we're just, if I move my head, you would see her.
I've seen her a couple times poking up behind you. Villains or anti-heroes?
If I had to pick one, I would go with anti-heroes. I actually like standard heroes a lot, believe it or not, despite writing a lot of anti-hero stuff. But yeah, anti-heroes are the two of them.
Board games or video games?
Oh, Jesus. Can I give up walking instead? I guess I would have to go with video games, but that is a real close one.
Can you give me one sentence that captures your writing style?
My systems are the coolest systems.
And then if your protagonist had a theme song from any of your series, what character would it be and what song would it be? And I'll give you plenty of seconds here to think that through if you want.
The latest protagonist, Wolf, and his song would be Bad to the Bone.
All right. Now, we're able to find everything as far as your published works go on, I assume, on Amazon, on Kindle, all that stuff. And as far as your books go, do you typically, do those get publish hardcover or paperback as well?
Yes. I guess that's probably overstates it. You can get them hardcover or paperback if you want them. That's the real answer. Okay. But you have to specifically order them through Amazon. They're not. I produce like 20 copies maybe under normal circumstances. My readers are pretty closely tied to Kindle Unlimited, honestly. Lit RPG and Dungeon Court does not have much of a presence in traditional spaces. Shami's works have much more presence in traditional spaces because there's readers in traditional spaces. My readers are not in the traditional spaces. So it's available if you want it, but it's not, you would have to go out of your way to get it, basically. It's much, much easier to get it on Kindle.
Okay. I discovered Kindle Unlimited, and then when I started working an hour and 15 minutes away from where I live, I actually found that the libraries offer free apps, and they offer free ebooks and free audiobooks. And for me, audiobooks are life. I can go through an audiobook in literally a week because of the sheer just time that I drive. Like a 10-hour audiobook, I can finish.
Yeah, so I do have a fairly strong presence in the audiobooks, not as much so as the ebooks, but every one of my novels except one has an audiobook version. And for the most part, I make most of my money not on audiobooks, but one of my series, for whatever reason, Superhero Dungeon, is much more successful in audiobook than not audiobook, and I have no idea why. It's the same guy that did the other stuff. I don't know why that was a thing. So I guess I do have presence in there. I don't know if audiobooks are considered a traditional space or not. I was talking about like libraries and bookstores and stuff like that.
Right.
So as an attorney, I actually read more at work than I did with any other job I had, and that probably sounds weird because you're like, isn't that super busy and super stressful? Yeah, but everybody shows up at 8:30 in the morning for court, and court ends at noon, and there's 20 attorneys there, and you're only on 4 of the cases. And the rest of the time, you're waiting right outside the courtroom to be called in, and there's nothing to do. You're just sitting in a chair. So I ended up reading like 2 hours every morning because all my court was in the morning. I almost never had afternoon court. So I would, my job, my 8 hours included 2 hours a day of like sitting outside of a court staring at a door or a book. And I just got into the habit of reading Kindle on my phone. So people probably hear, like, as an attorney, you spend 2 hours a day like reading. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. As a courtroom attorney, I can't really do work with everybody moving around because it's all confidential. So I can't like open up a bunch of files. And I have to be right there at the door. So it's better than just sitting there doing nothing.
Exactly. Wrapping things up here. Unfortunately, there are several successful people with the name John Stovall. If people are looking online, how do they find you instead of an economics professor at BYU, a bass player in Wyoming, or the president of the bus drivers union in Louisville, Kentucky?
Dude, it's actually
people
worse than
find
that.
you, your books, and your social media.
Yeah. Just type John Stovall and the word author afterwards. Most of my stuff is John Stovall author. A lot of my hashtags, things like that. Just really quickly, I know you said wrapping up, but it was worse than that. So when I was an attorney in California, I was John Stovall. There were 2 other John Stovall attorneys. My own father was one of them. And then there was also an extremely successful attorney about 2 hours south of me with the same name. Also way better looking than me, but that's a whole different story. So I always laughed because I think I was the least well-known of the 3 Stovall attorneys. But anyway.
Well, we do thank you for coming on today, and all of your links are going to be down in the description below. Again, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today, John.
Super appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Eric, Scott, and I want to thank everyone for listening today. We post a new episode every Wednesday morning at 11 Eastern, 10 Central, and 8 Pacific Standard Time. We are on all podcasting platforms and are also on YouTube as well for video. After the additional episode airs, we post chapter-by-chapter videos every day in a smaller, easier-to-digest format. We do want to give a special shout-out to the final member of our team, Dan Mackison, one of the admins for the Frith Chronicles wiki, link listed below, and doing his best to keep everything running smoothly behind the scenes. If you want to reach out to us, you can email us at frithguildpod@gmail.com or on Facebook or any other social media by searching for Frith Guild Podcast. Just to remind everybody, we have links to everything in the description below on both the podcast and YouTube.
All right. Hope you have a good one.